I never thought the day would come when someone from my own family would humiliate me in public, but that's exactly what happened when my son-in-law kicked me out of his workplace. I was standing there, embarrassed, heartbroken, and confused, as the people around me stared. But what none of them knew, including him, was that the person he'd just insulted was about to change his entire life forever. So tell me, if your own son-in-law disrespected you like a stranger, would you let it go, or would you teach him a lesson he'd never forget? Because I chose the second option, and trust me, I don't regret a single second of it. It all started a few months ago. My name is Richard. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent most of my life running a small but successful car dealership in my town. I built it from the ground up, starting with just 2 cars and a rented lot. It took me years of sweat, hard work, and endless sleepless nights to turn it into a respected business. My wife passed away a few years ago, and since then, my daughter, Emily, has been the light of my life. She's all I have. So when she got married to a guy named Mark about 3 years ago, I did everything I could to make him feel like part of the family. Mark seemed like a good man at first, charming, hardworking, and polite. He worked at a different car dealership, a big one, and he often talked about how he wanted to open his own one day. I admired that. I even offered to mentor him, share my experience, maybe even invest if he ever decided to take the leap. But as time passed, I started to notice things that didn't sit right with me. He had a strange arrogance about him. He liked to brag about his sales numbers, how his dealership was way more professional than mine, how they only dealt in luxury brands, not old cars with scratches and history. I brushed it off. He was young, ambitious, maybe just too proud of his work. Then slowly, he began treating me differently. He stopped calling me Dad and started calling me Richard. He would interrupt me in family conversations, talk down to me, and even correct me in front of others when I spoke about business. Emily always told me to ignore it, that he didn't mean harm, but I could see the way his ego inflated every time he thought he knew more than I did. Still, I bit my tongue for my daughter's happiness. Then came the day that changed everything. I had been looking to buy a new car for Emily as a surprise. Something reliable, maybe a hybrid, because she'd just gotten a new job that required a long commute. I didn't tell her or Mark about it because I wanted it to be a surprise. Coincidentally, the dealership I went to was the one where Mark worked. I didn't even realize it at first. When I walked in, I just saw a nice showroom, bright lights, polished cars, and that expensive cologne smell that screams we sell dreams here. I was greeted by a young salesman who asked how he could help me. I told him I was just browsing for a reliable family car, maybe something mid-range, not too flashy. As he was showing me around, I noticed Mark walking out from one of the glass offices. He was wearing a sharp suit, holding a tablet, clearly feeling like the king of the place. I smiled, genuinely happy to see him working hard. I called out, "Hey Mark," but the moment his eyes landed on me, his expression changed. He looked almost annoyed. He came over, but instead of greeting me warmly, he whispered, "What are you doing here?" I was taken aback. "I'm just looking for a car," I said, smiling. Thought I might get something for Emily. He looked around nervously, then leaned closer and said, "You shouldn't come here without calling me first. This isn't that kind of dealership." That hit me wrong. "What do you mean, that kind of dealership?" I asked. He sighed and said, "Look, this place caters to high-end clients. You might not exactly fit the image." I thought I misheard him. "Fit the image," I repeated. "Mark, I'm your father-in-law." He rolled his eyes and said, "Yeah, and that's exactly why you should have told me first. Please, just leave before my boss sees you wandering around like this." My chest tightened. I could feel everyone's eyes turning toward us. The other employees pretended not to look, but I could sense the awkward tension. I tried to keep my composure and said softly, "Mark, I'm not here to embarrass you. I just came to buy a car." He raised his voice, "Richard, please don't make a scene, just leave." And that's when it happened. I said, "You're asking me to leave out of a dealership where you work." He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Yes, please go." The silence in that room was deafening. I felt my throat tighten, my face burn, but I didn't say another word. I just nodded, turned around, and walked out. That walk to the door felt like a mile. I could feel the pity in the stares around me. Once outside, I sat in my car for a while, gripping the steering wheel, shaking. I'd never been humiliated like that before, especially not by family. I drove home in silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Emily called me, cheerful as always, and I almost told her what happened, but I couldn't bring myself to ruin her peace. I just said I wasn't feeling well, but something inside me snapped that night, not out of anger but disappointment. I had always believed in treating people with respect no matter where you stood in life. I had built my business on that principle. So I decided I wouldn't yell or seek revenge. I'd let life do that part for me. But sometimes, fate has its own way of setting things right. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected call. It was from a man named Charles, the owner of that same luxury dealership. He said he'd heard of my name through a mutual contact who told him I was the owner of Harrison Motors, my own dealership. He wanted to meet and discuss a potential business collaboration. I was surprised but curious. When I arrived at his office, I realized he was the man Mark worked for. He was professional, warm, and incredibly respectful. He told me he admired how I'd managed to keep my business thriving for over 2 decades and was looking for local partnerships to expand into the mid-range market. I told him I'd love to discuss details, and over the next week, we exchanged ideas and plans. He seemed impressed with my experience and integrity. Then, during our 3rd meeting, something interesting happened. We were sitting in his office when Mark walked in. His face went pale the moment he saw me sitting there. "Dad, I mean Richard. What are you doing here?" He stammered. His boss looked at him and said, "Wait, you two know each other." I smiled calmly and said, "Yes, Mark is my son-in-law." The look on Charles's face changed instantly. He turned toward Mark with an expression I can only describe as pure disappointment. "Is this the same father-in-law you mentioned that time?" he asked. Mark froze. Yeah, I mean," Charles cut him off. "You told me your father-in-law ran some failing second-hand car lot, right? The one you said was outdated and irrelevant?" Mark's face turned red. He couldn't look at me. Charles turned to me and said, "Mr. Harrison, your dealership isn't failing, is it?" I smiled politely and said, "No, sir. We've had a record year. We've recently expanded to 2 more branches." Charles nodded, then looked back at Mark. "Interesting, because this man right here is the kind of businessman I admire, honest, hardworking, and humble. You could learn something from him." The silence that followed was delicious. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear. Charles then said, "In fact, Mr. Harrison, I'd be honored if you'd consider joining our dealership as a partner consultant. I think your expertise could help us bridge the traditional and modern sales approach." I couldn't help but smile. "That sounds like a great opportunity," I said, "but I wouldn't want to cause any friction within your team." Charles laughed and said, "Don't worry about that. Some people here need a little reality check." Mark looked like he was about to faint. So that's the situation I was in, sitting in the office of the same man my son-in-law worshipped as his boss, being offered a position above him. Before I tell you what I decided, tell me honestly, what would you do in my shoes? Would you take the offer and let karma handle the rest, or would you walk away with your pride intact? After taking a moment to think, I decided to accept the offer, not out of revenge, but because I genuinely wanted to help improve their dealership. Over the next few weeks, I started working there part-time, helping Charles with operational strategies. I didn't rub my new position in Mark's face, though I could tell he was uncomfortable every time I was around. The staff who had once seen me as the man who got kicked out now treated me with respect, often coming to me for advice. And Charles, well, he made sure everyone knew exactly who I was and what I had achieved. Mark tried to act like nothing had happened, but the tension was visible. One day, Charles called a meeting to introduce a new sales incentive system that I had designed. He praised the model, calling it a brilliant example of old-school wisdom meeting modern techniques. As I presented, I noticed Mark sitting in the back, fidgeting, avoiding eye contact. When the meeting ended, Charles turned to him and said, "Mark, maybe you should thank your father-in-law. Without his ideas, we wouldn't be moving forward this smoothly." The room chuckled politely, and I could see the humiliation eating at him. After that meeting, Mark finally came to me. His tone was different, softer, hesitant. "Richard," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for that day at the showroom. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." I looked at him for a long moment. Part of me wanted to say something cutting, something to remind him of how small he made me feel. But instead, I said, "Mark, pride can build walls between people who should be helping each other. I don't hold grudges, but I hope you've learned something." He nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. From that day on, he started showing me more respect, not just as a family member, but as someone he could learn from. Eventually, Emily found out about everything. She was furious at him at first, but I calmed her down. I told her it was over, and what mattered was that he'd realized his mistake. A few months later, Charles announced he was retiring and named me as an interim director for the dealership until a permanent one could be appointed. That decision alone spoke volumes. Mark stayed on as a sales manager, and while our relationship was never as warm as it could have been, it was professional and respectful. Looking back now, I don't think of that day at the showroom as humiliation anymore. It was a test for both of us. For me, to stay grounded even when disrespected. For him, to learn humility the hard way. Sometimes life has a funny way of teaching lessons we refuse to learn on our own. So, was I wrong to accept that job and let karma unfold right in front of his eyes? Or was it simply justice served cold? Either way, I know one thing for sure: respect is earned, not demanded, and family should never be taken for granted. If you were in my place, would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. And hey, if you were on my side, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share your thoughts about this whole mess below. I'll see you all in the next story.